Testing, testing.
I could hear that.
Chelsea, can you hear this one?
Yep, I can hear that too.
Chelsea, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, are
hear
we
this one?
audible now?
Yes.
Are we audible? Okay. 3 is the charm here. Good morning. I'm Deborah Martin. I'm Chair of the Public Design Commission. Welcome to the Public Design Commission meeting. As New York City's design review agency, the Public Design Commission, PDC, has jurisdiction over the design of permanent structures, landscape architecture, and art proposed on or over city-owned property. Today's meeting is being held in person at City Hall. Members of the public can attend and give testimony either in person or remotely. The public meeting is now commencing with the consent agenda and items number 29004 to 29028. Oh, please note that we are deferring items 29007 to 29017. Based on new information that we will discuss at the with the team, and those items will potentially return in the future. At this time, are there any other recusals, please? Okay, seeing none, let the record show there are no recusals. I'll now call for the vote. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote for the consent agenda. Henseth Arnstead.
Approval.
Isabel Castillo. Approval. Lori Robinson. Approval. Bill Heinzen.
Approval.
Karen Keel. Approval. Harry Maloney.
Approval.
Manuel Miranda.
Approval.
And Merrill Tosh. Approval. I also vote for approval, so let the record show all are in favor. And we'll now continue with the public hearing portion of this meeting. We're just going to pause a moment for those with the first public hearing item is item number 29029, preliminary review of the construction of an annex building for the Horizon Juvenile Center at 560 Brook Avenue in the Bronx. For standard procedure, the applicants will give their presentation, public testimony will be heard, and then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. And we can now. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Yeah, I'm Juan Peral from Grimshaw. Great. So thank you again for seeing us. This is for the Horizon Annex up in the Bronx. And I have my notes to try and skip through a lot of the slides so we get quickly to the changes from since the last time we were here. You can see the site here. Does this have a pointer? Yeah. So there will be a new entrance on Westchester and creating a sort of construction zone in the current field and trailers, separate from the existing facility that needs to be operating 24/7 during all of the construction, and the existing basketball court in blue that will be available to the youth again during the construction. If we go to the design drivers, these are some site photographs. We're looking for a positive change, a new look to a building that will be more like a facility in a college campus. We're looking for a normative environment for the youth, for their living quarters, for their educational facilities, and for their play areas. And we're looking to have access to nature and sunlight and daylight, the outdoors. The site is very, very land challenged. So the program is a vertical program in a site that currently has 2 stories, and this will be a 5-story facility. You can see here, it's 4 interlinked buildings. Another feature of the land challenging is the gaps between the buildings are quite narrow. And we have these breezeways that link the buildings so the youth, as they walk to school, get a taste of outdoors and the weather, and they're very excited about having that opportunity every day. To the south is the exercise pavilion, which is 3 stacked levels of basketball court size floors. The yellow is the education vocational building, and then there are 2 housing halls that connect directly into their homerooms in the school building. In terms of phasing, while we're building the exercise pavilion that goes first, and we're hoping to start construction late this year, early next year. As I said, the existing outdoor basketball court is available to the youth. And then once the exercise pavilion is open and available to the youth with 3 basketball courts, then the rest of the construction can continue. And then at the end, we create a natural turf playing field along Westchester Avenue. We go to here, you'll see the latest roof plan. It shows the exercise pavilion with photovoltaics, the school building with photovoltaics, the 2 housing halls with photovoltaics over the mechanical and open to the sky over the horticultural areas. And then the ag-grade playing field and the new staff entrance on Westchester. Ground floor. So the staff entrance and the staff have brand new facilities, lounge and security facilities, locker rooms. They go through security. In red is the dining. So there's a kitchen, back of house, and then 3 dining rooms with outdoor space. And you'll see later what that looks like. And then the yellow, 2 trade workshops at ground level. Level 2 is the health floor and also has culinary arts facility. And then level 3, there are 3 levels that are quite similar. There's the school building and the 2 housing halls in blue, connected with the breezeways. And then at level 3, we also connect to the second stacked level of basketball facility in the sports pavilion. Level 4, again, school and 2 housing. And level 5, the school. And again, we connect to the top floor, the roof level of the exercise pavilion. I should mention I said the horticulture, 2 outdoor horticulture areas with a classroom, an indoor classroom as well. And then if we skip past the elevations, you really see the building in the renderings. This is the zoning. So here in the rendering, you can see the exercise pavilion that goes first and it has the 3 levels of activity, basketball court. At the top, we also have a running track, and on the ground floor, we have 4 handball courts as well as the basketball. And then the school pavilion with the housing behind and the natural turf pitch. So from the concept to preliminary, the view from Brook and 149th Street is the exercise pavilion has moved back in this view towards St. Anne's Avenue. You can see the lower floor is behind the perimeter wall, but then the levels 2 and 3 are very open. And then the change on the view from St. Anne's and Westchester from concept is these are existing trees that are next to us at an abandoned right-of-way. And then as we developed the scheme, we needed a 2-hour rated wall at the perimeter on the EP, which has a side core and bathrooms and egress stairs for the youth. So it's open on the other 3 sides and creates a bit of rhythm with the 2 housing blocks that we're treating with BIPVs. You can see we're still working on developing the BIPVs and the PVs. We're at around 50% of the energy needed in this facility will be produced on site. And then another big change is we're now having terracotta slats instead of wood, so non-combustible. And these are so that the youth have a regular window they can see out, and the slats allow visibility up to the sky, but not down to the sidewalk, which is not allowed by law, and also for their privacy. And the slats are about 10 foot in front of the bedroom window, so you'll see a rendering of that in a minute. And now I'm gonna hand off to my colleague.
So I think one of the, apologies, thought I had this on. Hey, everyone. So one of the things, you know, that we're investigating as through preliminary design is the look of the facade, specifically the BIPVs. I know there's been some conversations. So these are our initial images of the design as presented, but we do want to state that there are alternatives that we're looking into. We don't have those alternatives today, but the first glimpses here really are to sort of speak or look about like how this material reacts to the daylight. So this is just a quick study showing how during the day with the different light elements this changes. The goal though from this point forward is to continue to look at the material itself. Right now it is a very efficient panel with a glazed front expressing the PV panels, but there's options in how we address both the front material and the sort of, call it backing material. So we've looked into options with the manufacturers for the building integrated PVs in terms of how we might be able to create a little bit more of a sensibility of the massing of this and the weight of it so that it feels a little bit more lighter than maybe sometimes the PVs could be perceived as. So this is the concept view looking from the subway line. I'll just quickly go over to the current view. What's significant here is the art wall that we'll talk a little bit about later on, which is located right adjacent to that edge. You can see the new terracotta slots, and you can see the reduced size of the massing of the exercise pavilion in the phase one. So then this takes a view of that at nighttime. From a lighting standpoint, we have some preliminary designs for the lighting, but obviously accenting that art wall, whatever the future art will be critical for this view and for sort of the public perception of the building. There's some light underlighting of the PV canopy in the sports area to help with indirect looking in. I'll skip through these a little bit, but this is basic lighting plan for the exterior, which you just saw in the image prior. And then this is the lighting scheme for the phase one exercise pavilion. This is the outdoor basketball courts. So here's our model presented at the concept phase. Again, the biggest change is in the massing is with the reconfiguration of this building, the exercise pavilion. You can see that it's now been sort of shifted or rotated and moved due to some challenges with zoning and whatnot. So, but we've now made a more compact and still providing the same amount of space for the youth to have outdoor activities within it. So the major changes on the materials are that we are moving from a wood slotted screen to a terracotta baguettes. Part of the reason was for code requirements of flame spread, but also beyond that, I think that there's some durability and maintenance concerns that the terracotta will help address. Otherwise, as we mentioned, the building integrated photovoltaics is an item we're still looking at. This is showing an example of maybe adding a bit of a bluer or cooler tone to these to try to bring some of the cool tones that are coming from the adjacent precinct building. There will be metal mesh screens incorporated as part of this, as well as the PV canopy and the porcelain facade. I'm going to pass it off to Elizabeth.
Thanks. Oh, multitasking here. Since our last presentation, we wanted to address the concerns of the planting in the interstitial spaces, whether or not there would be sufficient insulation or insolation, really the availability of natural light. How the turf area of this recreation field would be treated. And whether or not there was sufficient, again, insulation for an area that we were proposing as the meadow. So following the commission's requests, we, working with Grimshaw's team, there was a daylight analysis identifying, quite frankly, cold and hot spots, availability of natural light and scarcity of natural light. As you can see, it's almost intuitive. And with that, the heat radiation from that natural light and how that would affect the planting strategy. So just to make sure, this is north, and this is the east facade, which would receive the most available natural light. This courtyard is really quite shaded, quite interior, in fact. And this space would get more light later in the day. Again, with the radiation, you have a sort of, yes.
Are you using all the times together, or, I mean, when the sun comes around, the rest doesn't use everything, so just curious.
It's sort of like an aggregate, I would say, yeah, of the information. So the daylight hours are demonstrated here, with this area being in shade throughout the day, quite frankly. This morning, this afternoon, based on the massing of the building. Similarly, the heat obviously would change throughout the day because in the morning exposure would be the warmer, and then the cooler would be in the afternoon. So you get this pocket with exposure, but again, closer to the building, it's really areas that sort of suggest, I would say, an understory condition in terms of the planting strategy. Keep, no. North is, oops, I'm sorry. North is to the left.
Sports field, for orientation for everyone, the sports field is at the bottom left there, so it's not included in the daylight study. I think that's a little disorienting, but once you know that.
And to be honest, the assumption regarding the sports field is that except for very early in the morning, it is fully exposed to daylight. And so, I apologize for the graphics, but this is the existing building in this area and how these areas began to preliminarily zone out in terms of the more shaded areas, the more areas that are more exposed to particularly direct sunlight in the morning, and then what we're calling a full sun condition. Since this time, we have refined this somewhat. So let me see. Again, so where we have a deeply shaded condition, this is the suggestion of the quality of the space. This is on the eastern portion near the staff entry, the understory planting, and the staff breakout area, which would have a sort of the level of shade would suggest an area of respite within the facility. And similarly, the interior court. Now, in these instances, we in our workshop with members of the commission, again, the concerns were about what plants would be more suitable. And in these instances, we're looking at more of the ornamental, adaptive, but non-native species that are tolerant of very low light conditions. And we're working on the palette for the areas of microforest or we're calling urban pocket foresting, that uh, we're really at this point delegating to the perimeter of the annex building because of the exposure to sunlight, and from trees to understory plants. The selection includes consideration of the safety and sightlines through the site so that we're not encouraging elopement, which is one of the factors we found in other projects where if somebody has the opportunity to hide, they might. But in order to maintain the idea of diversity in the planting in these zones, even if they are quite narrow. Similarly, in the deep shade, this is a work in progress. But again, this moves away from more of the natives and more building out mass with the adaptive ornamentals to give that feeling of shade and respite. And then in the native plant meadow, this with grasses would be more of the experience of those plants there.
And the native plant meadow, sorry, native plant meadow is not on your like study, it's adjacent to the food sport field.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that will not be accessible to, it's for visual access only, correct?
At this point, it's visual access, yeah. And then the concern about established post-establishment maintenance. During the establishment period, there's a very aggressive schedule of weekly irrigation, removal of needs as necessary, weekly care. But the theory of microforesting is that the established forest is self-sustaining. In our research, there is advice whether or not to plant emergent species or climax species, and we believe that there will probably be a mix and of minimal disturbance of the soil and undergrowth. So some of the concerns about maintenance and care, where as the planting plan is evolving, where there is expected to be more foot traffic for various reasons, those areas would be more conventionally maintained. They're also more conventionally planted, but the microforest will not receive foot traffic. And so we're expecting the self-sustaining strategy to hold there. As Juan and Stephen explained, the idea of porosity, visual access to the surrounding landscape, and for that matter, auditory and olfactory connections are really important, plus the opportunity to incorporate education and information as part of the scheme of circulation to the scheme is really important. When we get to the roof and the terraces, the paving the finished pattern, finished palette is pretty standard for exterior finishes, unit pavers, congruent with waterproofing and building envelope concerns. But the idea is to activate as many of the corridors as possible with the connection to nature. And with that, examples, for instance, narrow but built-up planters with self-contained irrigation that can be manually controlled will be part of that scheme. Oh, am I going backwards? No. Again, the idea of what those corridors could be like in terms of educational opportunities with interpretive signage, and in here and opportunities for horticultural care. In our meetings with the Hort Society, in their programming, they emphasize to us that the youth participants are really motivated and very interested in the horticultural, the floricultural aspects of growing, and wanted to make sure that the programming and planning and design could accommodate those aspirations. So in our upper horticultural roof plan, we have this diagram shows very similarly laid out schemes. However, right now in the office, we're discussing more more dedicated approaches to the roof, so that, for instance, one classroom area would be oriented towards urban agricultural, but the other classroom would be oriented towards floricultural training as part of the schemes. This has evolved since then, but we're looking at how we can efficiently lay out large planting beds that will accommodate the urban agriculture and floriculture programs in a meaningful manner, not give them short shrift in terms of scale, and the difference in how the planting palette could evolve from vegetable farming to medicinal and horticulture for ornamentation. Again, with the interior program and the exterior program, there's the idea of anything that's planted at the level of the pavers would involve using compost socks. We have used this on other projects with some success, being able to limit the depth of the growing medium, which, as we know, is very granular, without having to go to hard edge. And if you know the Brooklyn Navy Yard roof farm, it sort of extrapolates on that. I want to say aesthetic in terms of suggesting an agricultural planting. There's also consideration of using interior, obviously grow lighting to start crops, to maintain crops. This is another part of the program. And I believe this illustration is being updated, but we do have a mix of low and raised planters, in part also to ensure accessibility to all participants to the greatest extent possible. And interior classrooms that have the interior-exterior connection that's really strong in terms of the use of glazing, the visual connection, the physical access, and how that gets built out. And this is the Navy Yard roof farm, in case anybody hasn't been there. And that's where we are.
Thank you so much. We will see if we have anybody signed up for,
We have one more.
oh, sorry. I'll go ahead. You can try and use this one.
Let's quickly look into the interior view update. So as you see here, we create the environment for the housing unit to be to have a normative environment more similar to a college dormitory. And then we did a series of daylight study to balance the window size, the outlook view extent, and also the daylight studies to optimize the design. And then this is the view from the housing lounge looking out. We have two recreation areas for the youth for each housing unit, one active, one quiet space accessible for the youth. And then for the dining room, there's 3 new dining halls. Each of them has an outdoor space and plus a view to the nature. And then this is the view from the all 3 level of the exercise pavilion to show the daylight penetration and the extent of the view to the sky. In the recent workshop with the youth, they expressed a strong desire to have all 3 levels to be a canvas for the Percent for Art program. And then this shows the PV canopy study on the roof of the exercise pavilion. The current proposal in discussion with ACS is to go with the bigger gap shown on the right, but yet we plan to, but with installation of every other row of PV initially. So to see if the youth enjoy more daylight penetration. And then once the annex and the outdoor sports field are built, if used, they would prefer more shade. ACS, they can install the remaining PV if needed. And I'd like to very quickly, we did a quick study of the view. Yeah, Where it has, yeah.
On the model, perhaps.
Wondering if you can explain where this new view is. It seems like it's just a piece of it, so I was trying to understand the whole
Yeah, this
roof
is the view
in
looking at,
plan.
yep. This is a same view, yes, looking at the south, so standing at the court, looking at the south. And then so you have our court at the left-hand side and then looking at the south. And then the PV, it's a saddleback. And then in this view, we're removing the east side of the saddleback. So, so the west side. Yeah, I mean, the PV canopy look like that. The array look like that, slope roof, and then we take out the one side of it.
So where is that here? We really just, where exactly on the roof are you taking it out?
See.
Sorry, it's just trying to understand. It's that roof, right?
Yep, so
And it's open.
yeah, we take in like every other row of the PV right here from the east side. And then I
It
think-
looks like, so where are the PVs in this? In this rendering? I'm just, you
Right.
just, you know,
I think it's a view, it's between this one, because it's kind of, and then this one we go with the bigger gap, which is the 10-inch gap between the two.
I'm
So
just confused by the rendering. It looks like I'm looking at sky, but maybe I'm mistaken. Am I looking at the same?
Let me ask the question a different way. What percentage of the roof is available for sunlight? What percentage?
it's more than 50% because there's a gap. 10
More
inch-
than, I'm sorry,
More than.
more
50.
than 50. Okay. And that's a change from the last time that you presented the concept, correct?
Correct.
And the way you achieve that, to answer your question, is by the entire roof surface, if I'm understanding this correctly, will now be as it appears in that rendering, the entire roof will look like that. Is that right? Because your strategy is that the PVs appear on those wider struts, is that correct?
I think our current strategy is that it depends on the age. We're still thinking about the age to make sure it looks like holistic age. But in the sports field, we will remove 50% every other row.
So you're taking every other row out here? I'm just trying to understand. I mean, I think it's a pretty simple question and I don't know why I'm confused. Anybody else confused?
So what we're looking at here, is that, right,
Where are the?
Maybe the architect, or, I mean, you're the architect too. I don't know. I'm just confused.
Yeah, I can point to that, yeah. So it's,
Because there's this new rendering, right?
Yeah.
This looks like 100%, right? I don't, unless I'm misreading this.
So what it is, they're doubled up, they're a sandbag. Yeah, they're doubled up, right?
Right?
So once you take one out,
Yep.
right, 50% is gone,
So you're
right.
And you-
taking every other.
every other one, and there's a 10-inch gap already. So now it's more than 50% access to the sky, minus all the beams that are up there, because we need beams and we need a sort of mesh, security mesh under the PVs, because we're now creating these large gaps. But the rendering is accurate because when you're standing at the corner of the playing area and you're looking up, you will see that amount of sky. That's from the model.
Okay.
Okay.
We will first, I mean, actually, I just want to make sure they finish their presentation and we ask for public
No,
testimony and then we can
That's
come
the
back
PD
to the
for
discussion
no,
as well.
That's the PD for the.
Yeah, but thank you.
and then the last slide is the percent for art update. So, we'd like to share with that. So it's, this is the whole wall facing the subway. And then the dining hall landscape, the breezeway connecting the school program and then the housing unit. And plus the housing, plus the school corridor, this is all on the list. And then now the most reason why we didn't list it in this diagram is the youth, they share the desire to have the EP solid wall be the canvas of the Person for Art program. So, yeah, and then this is our last slide.
Should we take testimony first? Sorry, I just want to call for public testimony first and then we'll get into discussion.
How I'm hearing, not how you're explaining.
We're going to have a chance to ask all of our questions, but first I just want to make sure if there's any in-person testimony. I don't see anybody in here. There is nobody signed up remotely either. I just want to confirm that. Chelsea, has anyone signed up for remote testimony?
No one has signed up for remote testimony. Is anybody in the Zoom room here to testify? If so, please use the raise hand feature. Seeing that there are no hands, I think we can proceed.
Thank you. Go ahead, commissioners.
Okay, so we have a number of areas where there are questions. I'll start with you, Meryl, just clarifying the nature of the presentation, please.
I'm just trying to understand. I applaud the idea of opening up. But I worry that if you hit weather, those playing fields are going to be not usable for days on end. I'm just, that's the trade-off, right? Because you're not going to do a stadium retractable roof for a couple $1 million. I understand that. I'm just curious, the playing fields themselves, are they quick drying? Are they drained properly? Because with an open roof, if those fields don't work, they could be lost for months. I think it's one of the things we have to think about. Also, let's start. I just want people to think about it. I certainly don't have any answers. In a way, it's not fair to pose a question that you don't have a solution to.
Right.
I mean, the EP is 3 stacked courts, right? So the two below the first level and the middle one do have a slab over them. So although they're open on 3 sides and have access to sky, views of the sky, and driving rain will kind of will somewhat get in there, they slope towards the west to gutter, so they should dry pretty quickly. And the top one was always meant to be outdoor, so the amount of sunlight can be adjusted, but it was going to rain in there, and just like it rains in their current field and basketball court. They do have an interior gym, completely interior basketball court already in the facility for all weather.
You stand the possibility. I've been involved with schools and facilities for quite some time, of losing these access to light and air kind of on a regular basis.
Lori?
I have been arguing to try to get some light in these PVs. So, we don't always, I don't know if it's agree, but anyway. And I agree the rain, because I'm sure you have internal drains or there's some way to deal with the water up there. But so now you have this gap because you wouldn't have a total coverage anyway, because it's a PV. It's not a roof. It was never a roof. So it's a PV that's being hopefully paid for by DCAS. True? So we're hoping that DCAS comes to the rescue. And so maybe we could hear from DCAS about the facade and the roof and their contribution. And I'm curious what you're contributing, or hopefully are contributing, which is exciting, by the way.
Right, so we are currently evaluating the proposal. We do have a mandate to install solar on public buildings. We do have to also evaluate the business side of it. As we look to install these structures, we want to maximize the amount of solar that's on the roof. But there's also other considerations that are beneficial to not just this facility, but any facility. We want to take those into account as well. We haven't made a final decision yet, but typically we do fund these projects. We have other projects with DDC that we fund. I just want to say that we haven't finalized anything here yet, but we're working on it. We want to see where this goes, and then we make a decision on the economics after.
So if the team doesn't have a confirmation from DCAS, will you be expecting that they will plan two separate design paths based on whether they receive that support or not?
We just received this recently, so typically it takes a bit of time for us to go back and forth, analyze the economics. I think the team here has done on other projects at least, looked at different types of panels that allow more light through. Some of the panels allow less light. One thing that we have to worry about is if there's going to be snow up there, you know, you want to have gaps to have light, but the more gaps, then you start having icicles as the water starts dripping down over time. So then where is that balance? It's never a perfect solution, as it was already mentioned, but how do you optimize that solution? How do you optimize it on the technical side, on the usability of the facility, and on the economics as well? At the end of the day, one cost that's fixed here is the structural cost. So how do you then optimize that with the amount of panels that are up there? We're not there yet. We still are discussing, and it's not just a discussion that we have to have with Grimshaw or DDC. We have to go back to OMB, and you know, there's quite a lot of stakeholders to not just give approval, but at least get their opinion in there so that we can make the best
Kind
decision.
of clarification. So you only pay for, you don't pay for the structure, you just pay for the racking? What do you,
I mean, that's the racking. Those long beams, I would consider them
Yeah.
racking.
the beams, not the
vertic-
columns?
The vertical, yeah.
Oh, you
everything
would
that-
pay for the call. I'm just trying to understand, because you said, I'm just clarification. It's not just the racking system and the PVs.
I would love not to pay for them, but
And in your experience, given the balance here is sunlight.
Yeah.
As the team has stated in their presentation, they're trying to make sure that they harness the restorative impacts of nature and connection to the outdoors for the inmates of this facility. So there's a balance between efficiency of material placement.
Yeah.
And then their biophilic and restorative concerns of the team, which are important and legitimate. So in your experience, would it make, is there another way that I think the team said it's more than 50% that you have revealed, right? By removing alternate rows. Is there another strategy? For example, would it make more, can you recommend another strategy as opposed to alternate rows? Would it make more sense to have it be half the roof with no? I mean, what would you recommend? Pardon? No, but he has experience with the different strategies, so.
yeah, so I think the inter-row gaps are important, especially if you make it in a way where you allow a bit more sun between those gaps. You can probably reduce that gap, that you still get those benefits of the sunlight. There are panels that the backing sheet is completely transparent. We have some actually installed at M276. A few rows of that school allow for sun to go through into that they have a little porch area there where they have plants. So that's why those panels are that way. The only area that does not allow sun on that school are the cells themselves. And then the gap between cells is also a bit wider. So you can choose the right product. I think with UU and Grimshaw, we've looked at companies, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Spanish company, I can't think of the name. Sorry? Onyx makes really good panels. So yeah, I mean, it would come a bit of a cost to us, but there's benefits there. So that's why we have to make that evaluation on a cost analysis, and of course the benefits of the users under there. So do you allow more do you put more panels in that allow light through per panel? Or do you just use more standard panels that, and with more space in between them? That I don't know right now, to be honest with you. We just have to evaluate that.
Okay, and those are different. I wanted to know for the record that those are two very different solutions.
Correct, they are, yeah.
Yeah.
It wouldn't change the structure for the panels, though. I think that would be the same. It's just the rails where these would be mounted, that would change a little bit.
But if I'm understanding correctly, and please correct me if I'm
Sure.
wrong, the ones that are porous would would entail a larger surface area being covered by them because the porosity would be what would provide the light. Is that right?
Yeah, though, you could put more. It allows you to put more panels. so to
Right,
speak,
which
yeah.
is perhaps not as consistent with the team's goal of harnessing the restorative impacts of nature.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, we're interested in looking at the bifacial
Yeah.
products are transparent between the cells. You can see the sky and the sun comes in. So they're more expensive, but they generate more electricity. We could have the same approach of, 40% or whatever the percent is that we're at. In the solid panels, these are solid panels from underneath that you see white, like the ceiling. But the bifacial, you see cells and you see glass. So there is more, I think there's a better connection to the sky with those. I should also say for clarity that at SD, all of the project is on budget. So the additional funding that we're seeking from DCAS is now to make sure at DD, when we do the estimate again and the scheme is more developed, that we're still on budget. We may find ourselves being under budget if DCAS is generous with their funding and can return some of the project funding back to the city. That would be wonderful.
But given the timeline that the gentleman from DCAS, and perhaps you need to speak to this, I know that this project is under emergency declaration, right? So would the timeline, DCAS's timeline work with your timeline?
So because we already are paying for the PVs and BIPVs in the budget at SD, there's not much, there's no immediate risk. We went through this process at 70 Mulberry. It does take time to work through with DCAS and get to the final amount that they will contribute. There we were generating 33% of the electricity. Here we're at 50 right now. But I think we're okay from a funding perspective.
Okay, so if you're on budget, if I'm
Mhm.
understanding this correctly, and you get the DCAS support, what will change?
So between SD and DD and then to CDs, the design is developing, the client has requested additional things. Like the basement is now a full basement instead of half.
Oh, I
There
see.
are additional things for the youth,
Got
systems, et cetera. So we're hoping that with some additional funding, we can pay for all of those extras and still carry on the emergency deck and get this built.
Understood. Thank you. Okay, so go on.
Okay, so it seems like a great thing for DCAS to invest in, and I mean, really fantastic thing to focus on. So question about the blue color that you're describing here. I know it's hard to get samples from these people, the BIPVs.
Samples are being made.
Okay,
Some are on their way already. Some
so,
to get in a
yeah.
few weeks.
So you spoke about a blue color versus a white back sheet. Yeah, I saw that. And then, I mean, it's like a Xerox of a, it's like, you're talking about a huge amount of surface area for a building that is going to affect people who aren't there, who are in neighbors and, the people there. So I'm anyway, very focused on this because I think it's a great idea. And so using this as an opportunity to really get at how this design can be really is the best possible, which I know that's what you're trying to do. So textured glass with a satin finish, what does that exactly mean?
So the sample that's here is satinated.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
Manufacturer is saying that adding more of a texture to that
Mhm.
maintains the efficiency, but you get a more solid look and more transparency, more reflection of sky and surrounding buildings. The backing color, which is white
Yeah,
in
the
this
backing.
sample,
Yeah.
is blue in some of these photos, and I think we're also looking at a terracotta type color to maybe think about, well, test. How does that look? Now we have the
But that's
terracotta
terracotta behind the black
in the gaps. So in the
in
gaps
the little
between
gaps,
cells.
in these little gaps.
So, yeah, so it could be any color
Hmm.
in the backing. White is the most efficient because it
Yeah.
reflects sunlight,
Hmm.
but a color in the backing is
Mhm.
not too, it doesn't compromise the efficiency too much, and it changes the look of the building because you can either match it with the terracotta, so it all feels
Yeah, but it's
similar
not
tone,
terracotta.
or if you go to the
It's
rendering,
glass.
or
It's like,
right, it's
Yeah.
or if we go to blue, then it's
because you're gonna be
matching,
putting it against with those baguette things, right?
right.
Mhm.
And if it's blue, it's more about the sky
Right.
and reflecting the sky.
Well, I mean, I'll leave it to you because this is a process. So if you get the money, you're then gonna keep working on it, I assume, and that
Okay.
you'll be looking at these materials together with the new samples that you get, and I'd love to see them. We'd love to, because it's very exciting to have DCAS as a partner on a big project like this. And we just, we want daylight. We also, the royal we also are interested in the benefits of the PVs.
Right. And I think Stephen mentioned we were taking some of the cues from the precinct next to us and
Yeah.
the kind of coloring that they have. So that's where kind of the blue came from and sky.
Yeah, okay. All right, I guess that's it for me.
There was some images in the landscape architecture with interpretive signage. And I just thought the more interactive or participatory approaches would be a lot more interesting than the more straightforward. There was another photo where there are planters next to the windows. Yeah, I think this on the right is a lot more interesting and probably more appealing to, the population. So I see how on the left that's easier to do. But
Well, I think
yeah.
when we were talking to ACS, there was also an interest in making the interpretive signage, which is not our specialty at this time, more interactive. And so there was internal discussion as to whether or not that could be, I don't have the technical terms, so I'm going to say tablet driven, for instance, that there were touch screens and things that people could do to engage more with what they were seeing as well.
I think that's potentially interesting, or it doesn't even have to be screen-based necessarily either, just even, maybe this, kind of block of, text is separated and integrated with the planting more in some
Mhm.
way, or, almost more like a nursery in
Mhm.
some ways, like labels and things like that.
Synoptic, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Elizabeth, can you speak a little bit about what is the width of the microforest areas?
But they're narrow.
Yeah.
They are narrow.
And
In
dark.
some instances, if we have, they average about 10 to 12 feet. So that's quite narrow. And I know that in discussing the rationale and the preparedness for this, we were actually wanting to go out on a limb, I'm going to say, and sort of make a reference to not the more, I would say, cultivated or formalized landscapes that we see are intentional, but the more of the voluntary landscapes that we know that are throughout the city, like if you drive down the Henry Hudson, which is now, I guess, the Joe DiMaggio, you do have that intensity of planting and those very narrow grass verges, and we're thinking that we could replicate that. Similarly, there, particularly where it is that you have infrastructure sort of spaces left over, you have this type of density and variety of planting, and that's what we're looking for. So some of the spaces are a bit wider. We have as much as 20 feet in one instance that we're massaging in terms of a northern portion, but at the building perimeter, it's pretty tight.
So we understand that you have 4 years of intensive maintenance,
Mhm.
and that's great. That's a lot of time. If this concept fails, because the verges and things you're talking about, we're often situations where we have like a very high pH, mostly invasive plants, and you have the palette here that is native and requires the pristine soils, and, you know, it's may succeed, it may not. And you're having interpretive signage that may be related to something that ultimately doesn't necessarily succeed. So what's your plan there?
Well, first of all, on the technical side, we're engaging a soils specialist to help us with the design of the soils to make sure that we have the right pH, that we have the right strategy there. We, I'm going to sort of default to a different kind of answer first and then come back to it. Whatever planting we do, there is always, particularly when you don't have extraordinarily generous space, there's always the risk of some sort of failure that makes it more apparent.
Sure.
Because of the restriction. But we, one of the reasons why we are going to academic experts for this is to make sure that in our plant selection and the strategy that we can have more success. And I think in terms of the education part, it's very difficult, I think, to do exactly that predictive, 50 feet ahead of you, you're going to see a
It
beach,
is.
right?
Yeah.
But the idea of how urban forests might work, why they occur where they do naturally in many communities, how they are beneficial rather than necessarily weed-strewn locations, how they can be cultivated, I think is part of the mission of this approach to the planting.
Yeah, and that's great. And I hope it succeeds. But my question is,
Yeah.
if it ends up being more like a garden as opposed to something that's self-maintaining, because it seems that your kind of long-term plan is, and the reason that you're even describing it as a microforest is that it would actually become a self-sustaining system. Is that right?
That's one of the goals, yeah. But the more densely shaded courtyards, the interior courtyards are more garden-like.
Right. And
They will require the presence and maintenance that there will be, let me put it this way, there has to be a commitment to that sort of labor
Understood.
in that maintenance, and whether or not it extends to the forest is a question that we have to pose to ACS, because obviously it's a budget consideration, first of all. But the goal is to reduce as much of that as we can.
So over your, just kind of getting to the question of like, we're hoping for best case scenario, the microforest establishes, it's really happy. It doesn't mind that shade. It doesn't mind the width, but let's say it doesn't. And the rest and the entire landscape becomes like those deeply shaded areas. Do you have a plan for that?
Well, we have irrigation as part of the scope of work. As somebody who lives within coughing distance of Inwood Hill Park, this weekend, we know how quickly things can become sere.
Yeah.
And whether or not irrigation is an occasional feature that's extended to the microforest to make sure that there is this survivability is one of the things that will go into the programming.
Will the infrastructure for irrigation be installed?
Yes.
So it will all be, it will.
Yeah,
all- okay.
the scope includes irrigation.
Great.
For that. Yeah.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay. And the plant palette, if the microforest palette, because it's a beautiful, beautiful palette, very ambitious. plant palette.
It's too beautiful in my opinion.
Yes, I want to say, kind of agree. I'm not, I would be shocked and amazed if
Yeah.
most of these things survive.
Mhm.
So what's the plan when they don't?
Well, okay. I'm trying not to sound glib. That's why I'm hesitating. 4 years of care is really a larger commitment than is typical,
Sure.
first of all.
For sure.
And we understand that academically, the original Miyawaki forest started in almost like a quarter acre,
Mhm.
you know, to get that level of establishment. But I go back to my experience working on highways where we are, in fact, not calling them microforests, but we are planting as densely at all different levels to restore highway verges where actually New York State DOT has narrowed the landscape opportunity over time. And we've seen where those landscapes, when they're cared for, even in their narrowness, they're really beautiful in those little instances where they still exist. So I hate to say we're stepping out on faith because this is a big commitment. But I believe that there are precedents even in the New York City area for this approach, even though it's not necessarily a DDC project.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I'm wondering is like the highway verges that you speak about, absolutely, there's like beautiful density in some of them, but typically wouldn't they be mostly invasive, salt tolerant plants accustomed to difficult conditions, unlike this palette, which is a woodland palette?
Okay, so, well, we don't have the insults that we have on the highways,
Right.
right? So we
But
have.
also very resilient insults.
Very resilient insults.
Yeah.
And we have some protection because of the nature of the site. It's actually, its security measures and its enclosures actually lend a level of protection to the landscape. So there isn't a lot of circulation in the vicinity of the microforest. There isn't a lot of de-icing. There isn't a lot of chemicals. There isn't a lot of other sorts of insult. And unlike the highway verges, this will be irrigated at least for the first 4 years.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a much stronger opportunity I was thinking about Weeksville actually when I was that, because the issue there was things were too successful. That the planting at Weeksville was also sort of naturalized and nativized. And certain things did much better than others. So let's put it that way. So that's one of the considerations. At the end of the day, is everything daisies? That
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of thing, right?
Yeah.
So the variety of plant material is going to be a critical selection. This is the debate as to the mix of emergent versus mature species and the timing on that. The survivability of the maturity of the plant material, whether or not things go in as whips or they go in as 1.5 to 2 inch caliper to 4 inch caliper, or whether or not there's a mix of that.
Yeah.
The arm wrestling within the office is to the extent to which we would use plugs versus seed, you know,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of those debates. I think this project for us is fairly unusual in that we've never done this level of solar study. You know, usually it's a sunshade sort of examination, but the idea of the degree of insulation, which we're seeing in Washington, and working with the commission there, they're very focused on how much light actually reaches the ground in terms of the planting strategies in DC. So again, that idea of how much light will reach the ground, what the conditions are, what the design of the soil is. Those are the things that we're looking at for this project.
Okay. All right. Thank you very
I mean,
much.
if we were doing a more traditional planting where, you know, maybe this level of due diligence wouldn't be, well, obviously it would require the same level of care, but there would be probably more, I would say, confidence in the approach.
Yeah, yeah.
I I feel equally confident that with the level of intention, we can bring the same expectation of outcome that we would to a traditional planting.
Great. I hope it's, you're right. All right. So commissioners, we need to wrap up in a moment and then I'll articulate some conditions related to this discussion. I want to give anyone an opportunity for another comment, if you have any, or question. Okay. All right. So in summary, before I take a vote on this preliminary submission, I want to note that we're going to request an interim submission on two matters, and you can weigh in on this, Lori, if I get this wrong. One is clarity on the amount of daylight on the roof. We agreed that it would be at least 50%. We understand that given the question of whether the DCAS funding will come in or not, and other design testing considerations, that you're going to be working out how that's achieved. But we'd like to see an interim submission that demonstrates that 50% of natural light available to young people up on the roof. And similarly, in the interim submission, we'd like to see the results of your PV studies in terms of materiality and color and texture, if you do the whatever finish you decide to use, so that we can see those things as an interim submission before the final. Similarly, we'd like to understand the long-term plan. We very much appreciate the extraordinary effort and extra 2 years of care that's going into this landscape. And we just want to make sure that given that this is an untested strategy in this kind of condition, what the long-term plan is should this fail, because we understand that your restorative goal of harnessing the restorative impacts of nature and connection to the outdoors is in part this access to the plants and what will happen if this strategy fails. So it's three things: daylight, PV, color and materiality, texture, and then the long-term plan regarding the plants. We'd like to see that as an interim submission. Do commissioners agree that those three interim submission conditions are correct? Okay. Manuel, did I miss anything related to the signage or the interpretive signage?
I just think, the more interactive approach I like, but it's very schematic right now. So.
Okay, fine. So that would be like, right, something we would see. Okay, so then fine. So with those conditions, those three conditions for an interim submission, I will now call a roll call vote. Sure. Yeah.
Just tell me, are we approving this project?
We
Are we approving it?
This is a preliminary roll call vote, and we are voting to whether to approve at this point. However, a condition of approval is that interim submission, that we approve the interim submission. That's a condition of approval that we will grant or not grant with this vote, right?
Right, that there'd be an interim before it comes back for final approval that we'd get to see. So it's a preliminary approval with that condition of an interim submission.
So Shioshi, if the interim submission doesn't accord with our discussion today, what would happen?
Well, then it couldn't go through final.
Then it would not go to final. That's what you're asking, right, Meryl?
Well, so for instance, if DCAS doesn't fund this, when the timetable of ours
Right,
moves
right.
forward,
Well,
where
my
are we?
understanding
Where
from
are we?
what Juan said is if DCAS doesn't fund it, it will still go, the roof will still go through as planned. It's just that other elements won't. So is that correct, Juan? Okay, yeah. So I mean, I think everything that has been presented here, we're not seeing the things that the DCAS funding would enable, because those things are not part of these elements, the exterior elements. Is that right?
Right.
But I thought they were I'm so sorry. I thought the DCAS funding was integral to the totality of all of these concepts working together.
It's
No.
not.
You see, this is why they pay.
It's like a it's like a rebate where, yeah.
You know what it is, Meryl? And I'm going to just quickly just answer this question and then you correct me if I'm wrong. Everything that has been presented today can be built with the funding they have. The things that would come with the additional DCAS funding have not been presented to this commission, correct?
Right, like the basement got double the size. There are systems that ACS now wants that were not in the budget originally. So we're hoping the funding helps deliver all of the things that ACS wants at the facility.
So if you don't get the funding, they don't get the basements.
Well, the
I mean,
project has
just to be-
contingencies, so the basement, maybe, yes. But the basement, not so much the basement because it's important. And there are project contingencies at SD that our CM builder seems to be quite confident that everything, that we're on track and that the basement can be accommodated. But there are other systems that, you know, maybe we would have to, and there might be some value engineering in terms of other things. So again, the DCAS funding is important because it allows us to, you know, go fast and breathe a little bit easier. If we don't put a BIPV or a BIPV, we have to pay for another material. So you don't save everything. A rain screen versus a BIPV, there's an increase in cost, but yeah.
So are you saying that if you don't receive the DCAS funding, that the BIPVs would not be
Exactly.
part of the project?
No, they're in the budget right now. Our SD budget includes
what I thought,
everything
yeah.
you've seen. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So again, I'm going to just at the
I'm
risk of
sorry.
being,
I confused it. I understand.
No, it's okay. This is a preliminary approval with the condition it come back for interim before final with all these conditions addressed.
so yes.
There was
Lori.
just one more point, which
Sure,
was, because Karen was saying, is there a building we can look at? So we had asked that you provide precedent images for different, but are there any precedents in New York City of BIPVs? I mean, I know you're building one now, but this is a big, I mean, we all love the future of this, but we want to know what it looks like, I guess. We
Yeah.
wanna-
So we already went with DDC to visit one building that's complete. And we're about to go in the next week or two. They're installing BIPVs in a high-rise tower in New York City that rain screen system similar to ours. So we're organizing a tour of that. Yes, yep, sure.
Okay, any more comments? And I'll repeat the conditions. So I want to state first that this is just preliminary approval with the condition that it come back for interim review to answer your question. So when it comes back for interim review, we'll be looking for three things. And ideally, we would have an answer from DCAS at that point, if possible. Maintaining at least 50% access to daylight on the roof. Some more clarity on the color and texture and placement of the BIPVs and the long-term plan for the garden areas should the microforest strategy prove not successful. Those three things. And those will be conditions of approval that we will not advance it without those three. Okay? All right. So with those three conditions, I'll take a roll call vote on item 29029. Preliminary review of the construction of an annex building, Horizon Juvenile Center. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote. Lori Hawkinson,
Approve with conditions. at
Bill
this point.
Heinzen.
Yeah.
I approve with conditions. I'm going to sneak in a comment that I join Commissioner Miranda in encouraging a more interactive approach.
Thank you. Karen Keel,
Approve with conditions.
Carrie Maloney, Manuel Miranda,
Approve with conditions.
Merrill Tish.
Approve with conditions.
And I also approve with conditions, so let the record show that we are unanimous in our approval of this preliminary review with the conditions for the interim submission. Thank you very much, team. Thank you. Okay. Are we taking vote? No. Okay. All right.
Sorry. Going here. Somehow or other.
Team, are we good in terms of audio? We can get started? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we're going to resume our public meeting, everyone. The next public hearing item is item number 29030, the preliminary review of the construction of the entrance stairs and adjacent site work at Morningside Park, 114th Street and Morningside Drive, 116th Street and Morningside Drive, and 122nd Street and Morningside Drive in Manhattan. Please note this project is located at a designated scenic landmark, and as such, the Landmarks Preservation Commission has issued an advisory report that the commission has reviewed and taken into account here. Per standard procedure, applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. We'll hear in-person testimony first, followed by testimony from remote participants, and we can now begin. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. A little bit redundant, but I'm Laura Drawbaugh, the landscape architect for the reconstruction of the stairs at 114th Street, 116th Street, and 122nd Street at Morningside Park. Morningside Park began as an Olmsted design and has been designated a scenic landmark. This is the same design that the Landmarks Preservation Committee approved unanimously in a recent public hearing. The goals are to make the stairs safer, ADA compliant, and to manage stormwater flooding. It will reuse or match historic materials depending on their condition to preserve the picturesque character of the park. As you know, Morningside Park is located in Upper Manhattan with a change of elevation of nearly 90 feet. We do get heavy rains causing flooding on the eastern lower edge. We have dense residential use to the east, lower part of the park, and then mainly institutional to the west. This 12-block long park serves a large population and area. This project addresses unsafe stairs and water runoff in 3 locations, A, B, and C. We have also added some work at the 116th Street Upper Plaza too. I'll go through each of these areas individually. So these 3 sets of stairs each have their own story, although they all began as part of the Olmsted 1887 Olmsted box design. Starting in the south, the southernmost stairs in this project are the gentle Y-shaped stairs at 114th Street. They're very dilapidated. The existing conditions are misaligned bluestone treads and asphalt landings in poor condition and no handrails. The sides are aligned with irregular carved boulders typical of Morningside Park and a rustic cheek wall. So our reconstruction will remove the existing treads and boulders, stockpile them, and construct a new concrete foundation, then reset the boulders and existing bluestone treads and provide 30 Landmarks gray concrete landings. If the treads aren't in good enough condition for reuse, we'll replace them with materials that match as closely as possible. And we'll also add a park security light in this area. And we're adding handrails on both sides of these stairs. So the second set of stairs, the mid stairs at 114th Street, are very different in character. They're wider since they connect to the grand granite staircase. And the 116th Street Plaza right up here, due to the constant flow of water from a protruding underground pipe, this area, and slopes above, the treads have been displaced from their foundation steps. Also, stormwater flows down onto the street instead of into the park's internal drainage system. And you can see during a heavy storm, we do get a lot of water coming down these steps. And we also have the non-ADA compliant handrails and boulder cheek walls on the steps. So our reconstruction will remove the existing treads and boulders from the existing concrete foundation, stockpile them, and then reset the boulders and bluestone treads. We'll pin them to the existing foundation, add drainage material, and provide landmarks gray concrete landings. If the treads are not in good enough condition for reuse, we'll replace them. The Grand Steps and Plaza at 116th Street are well-traveled and used for public events. So security and lighting is a great concern here. So we're adding several new park security lights in this area too. And we'll reset materials on the upper plaza area. And we'll adding handrails on the center and sides of these steps. So the third set of steps at 122nd Street, again, are a completely different character. They were built later and they have granite block cheek walls. And the treads are also very dilapidated. The steps are misaligned and there's only a very short rail of existing handrail. We can see in these pictures, the very poor condition of the treads and the deteriorating cheek walls. As in 114th Street, we'll remove the existing treads, stockpile them, and construct a new concrete foundation, then reset the existing bluestone treads and provide landmarks gray concrete landings. If the treads aren't in good enough condition, we'll replace them. And we'll also reconstruct the cheek walls. And we'll be putting handrails on both sides of the steps. So the existing deteriorating cheek walls are built of granite block and they have a step down character. They have no coping to keep water out of the masonry joints. So the historic intent of the early cheek walls and paths in Morningside Park was to place built structures and pathways so they're visually unobtrusive and recede into the natural landscape. So our reconstructed cheek walls will follow the slope of the landscape too. We'll reconstruct the walls and stairs in the same footprint with the same historic granite blocks on a concrete core using the existing joint pattern. Also, we'll use a rustic granite coping to protect the masonry joints. Because of the existing slope and elevation, the north and south cheek walls will be very different. This is an elevation of the north side of the steps and the cheek wall, which must retain over 4 feet of soil in certain areas. And elevation of the south side of the stairs where the existing grade actually drops below the steps in a few places. This is what it would look like descending the stairs with handrails on both sides for safe accessibility. And this is what it would look like ascending the stairs. These are the proposed site materials. We'll reconstruct the swales with granite block. The handrail is the same as the handrail previously approved for the stairs at 113th Street in Morningside Park. And we'll direct stormwater runoff into the park's internal drainage system using a variety of approaches, including new underground drain infrastructure and the new granite swale at 116th Street shown earlier. Near the 116th Street mid stairs, the exposed pipe creates a bird bath area, which is a favorite place for dogs to drink and birds to bathe. We'll reconstruct the bird bath with a dome grate so it won't flood and maintain its scenic character with mortared granite. In 1939, the plaza at 116th Street and Morningside Drive looked like this. However, it looks like this now on the north side. We'll address the leaning pedestal and light pole, and we'll also reset the coping handrail and remove vegetation that is damaging the retaining wall coping at this location. So back to the big picture for your questions and comments. Thank you.
I will first see if we have any public testimony. We don't have anybody in person. Jenna, do we have anyone signed up for remote testimony?
I do not see anyone signed up for remote testimony. Is anyone within the Zoom room here to testify? Just kidding, it's only PDC staff, so we may proceed.
Thanks.
Commissioners, any comments, questions? No. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. And if there are no questions or comments, I will now take a roll call vote on item 29030, preliminary review of the reconstruction of the entrance stairs and adjacent site work at Morningside Park. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote. Ken Seth Armstead,
Approved.
Isabel Castillo. Oh, yes.
Approved.
Lori Hawkinson,
Approved.
Bill Heinzen,
Approved.
Karen Keel,
Approved.
Carrie Maloney, Manuel Miranda,
Approved.
Merrill Tish. Approved. And I also approve, so let the record show that this preliminary review of the reconstruction of the entrance stairs and adjacent site work at Morningside Park is unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to give the team a moment to transition.
We'll actually take a quick 5-minute break for those that need to use the restroom, but we'll be back in 5 minutes. And online. Thanks.
Okay, we can hear you. Thanks.
Okay. All right, commissioners and presenters, we are going to hear a presentation for the next item. The next public hearing item is item number 29031, preliminary review of the reconstruction of the Allen Street and Pike Street malls and construction of a plaza at Pike Street in Manhattan. Per standard procedure, the applicant will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. We'll hear in-person testimony first, followed by testimony from remote participants. We can now proceed with your presentation. Welcome.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ted Aratakis. I'm a landscape architect with MKW and Associates. We've been working on this Allen and Pike Street Malls project with New York City Parks, with DOT, and with the community. Just some goals that we've outlined for the project. We're focused a lot on improving safety, improving accessibility, making the malls more comfortable, and adding lots of new trees to add shade and comfort. The project location, so it's located in Manhattan, in the Lower East Side. And you can see here, it's a very long, narrow, linear site in the center of the street. In terms of flooding, during large rain events, we sometimes see some flooding on the west side of the street in these corners. We will be addressing that through increasing pervious surface and drain cleaning and improving, reconstructing some of the catch basins. Surrounding land use, it's a very mixed use neighborhood. We've got some parks and some public facilities in the area. Neighborhood context, so we have many parks. Our park in particular, it's a long connector open space that connects malls to the north and to the south down to the waterfront. Getting into existing conditions. So we're going to look at the site in thirds. You can see here on the key plan. This pink area is the project that we're working on now, which is phase 2. Phase 1, highlighted in orange, was constructed about a decade ago. So this first slide is looking from Madison to Broadway. We're looking at lots of paved areas, bike lanes that are in the street, and a patchy canopy. We've got some mature canopy trees here, some areas where there's no canopy at all. And then to the north, now looking from Canal up to Hester, and you can see the connection to phase 1 up here. So our project is a big connector. Tree inventory, so we're removing many stumps and a couple conditional removal trees. There's some areas where we're going to be transplanting, and otherwise we're going to be protecting and supporting all of the existing trees. Site analysis, some key points here, uneven pavement and inaccessible transitions between the malls. We have lots of undersized tree pits and a bit of a patchwork of fencing that we plan to address on our project. Looking at some site photos. So this is in the south section of the site, down near Madison Street. You can see the uneven pavement, lack of furnishings, spotty tree canopy. Moving a bit north, this is an area where we have some great mature trees that we're going to protect and improve. Here you can see some of the furnishings that are existing, and you can also see that bike lane condition, that existing condition in the roadway. This area here, we're kind of calling our side mall area. That's this area off to the side. It's currently a right turn lane onto Broadway, East Broadway. And we've been looking at pedestrianizing that space with DOT. Here's another view of that space that we'll be pedestrianizing. And then looking to bike lane transitions. These are just some photos of bike lanes in the phase 1 project that has already been constructed. Here you can see where the bike lanes intersect with pedestrian areas. They do a bit of this jog that's for traffic calming. We also have city bike stations in the project. So on the right, this one is in our project area. On the left, this is an existing one nearby. Just notice the one on the left has this angled parking, angled station, which allows for more pedestrian access. So we're looking to make the one on the right in our project area more like the one on the left. We also wanted to show some historic context. So Pike Street in the 1930s and earlier looked like this. There was an elevated train line. There were tenements on both sides of the street. In the late 20s, there were renderings and a concept developed to remove the tenements, remove the train line, and create these malls down the center of the street. You can see kind of that construction progress and then what the original malls looked like, linear with lots of benches and many trees. We met with the community several times to hear about their goals and priorities for the project. So we had a community input meeting. We met with the community board a few times. We also spoke with volunteer gardeners who maintain some of the gardens in phase 1 to the north of our site. Now showing how our site fits into the greater city bike network. So our site is here in orange. So we know that we need to connect to various bike lanes. Looking at circulation context. So the pink is our site. Orange is phase 1 to the south and to the north. And what you'll see here is throughout, there's pedestrian walkways in the center. And then we've got a mixture of bike lane types going from phase 1, where they're all protected in the solid line. And now in phase 2, the existing condition where they're not protected. Our proposed plan is to make all of the bike lanes protected. So here you can just see that in a little bit more detail, where they're protected in phase 1 versus where they're currently not protected in phase 2, how we plan to address that. Again, in phase 1 to the north. The bike lane network was also studied extensively for the phase 1 project. So this diagram was part of the original PDC submission for the phase 1 project. And so we're taking many cues from what they've done, and we're trying to apply many of those ideas to phase 2. Looking at the landscape geometry, we know that the walkway should relate between phase 2 and phase 1. So in phase 1, we've got this curvilinear walkway. To the south, and then to the north, it's more of an angled geometry. So we feel it's important to connect to those two geometries and bridge them in our project. Now looking at design. So we're looking from Madison Street up to East Broadway. You can see here on the key plan, we've got this curvilinear central walkway. The Henry Street intersection, we are proposing pedestrianizing. We've studied that with DOT. We have long continuous planting beds with many shade trees and ornamental trees, accommodating the existing trees. Here you can see a little bit more closely furnishing nodes for seating that we've carved out. And you can also see the comparison in the dashed red line, that's the existing curbs. So you can see how much more of the street we're giving to pedestrians and cyclists. This is all based on recommendations from DOT, and it reflects a lot of their striping out there now, but making it more of a paved, more hardcore paved, protected situation. Looking at the Henry Street pedestrianization more closely, we know that crossings between the bike lanes and pedestrians is very important. So we're using tactile surface and these kind of curves in the bike lanes to really create calming and notice for people when they're crossing those two different intersections. We've got a number of furnishings that we've laid out. We're still studying the exact layout of these furnishings. I know there was a question about the bike racks. So we're going to study this layout and make sure that there's no conflicts between pedestrians and cyclists. We also have these kind of semicircle welcome mats, as we're calling them, to welcome people into the space. Here you can see that space in section where we've got seating buffered by low plantings, bike lanes on the outside, and then trees. On this slide, we're looking at an enlargement of a typical block. You can see we're really trying to maximize comfort. So a gentle curving walkway, furnishings, and lots of trees to add comfort. Now we're looking between East Broadway and Canal Street. So again, you can see how we've expanded the site. You can see up here the area that we've pedestrianized. If you recall the side mall that I showed in the site photos earlier. We'll look at that a little bit more closely in a bit. So you can see how much space we're giving back to pedestrians and cyclists. Looking at this central slide a little bit more closely, you can see how we've accommodated trees. And then this space up here, so we've designed it with flexibility in mind. So it could be used for a market space. It could be an event space. We've spoken with Grow NYC about this, and what they've said is they don't want to commit to anything until they see the built product. But we've studied the other markets that they have in the area, and this is kind of in line with the sizes that they use. And then just jumping to the north here between Canal and Hester, very gentle walkway connecting to that angled design from phase 1. Here you can see how we've bumped it out. Looking at planting, we're using largely native plants throughout. All of these swaths will be single species swaths, and we're looking at seasonal interest and durability. We also know this is a rat mitigation zone, so we've kept that in mind. Fencing, so there's a mix of fences. We plan to use low pipe rail to delineate pedestrian areas from garden beds, and then post and chain fencing to protect the bike lanes. We're also planning to replace some pavers in phase 1 areas. These are areas where the pavers have failed, and we will replace them with a different style paver that will be more durable, but in similar colors to connect. Here you can see the different furnishings we're using. And then sustainability, so it's a lot of pavement right now, and we plan to make it much more pervious. All right, that's what we have for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will now see if we have any in-person testimony. It doesn't appear to be so. Jenna, do we have anyone signed up for remote testimony?
We have no one signed up for remote testimony, and we have no one in the Zoom room currently here to testify. Thanks.
Thanks. We can now discuss the project.
Okay, any questions or comments, commissioners?
Oh, good.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I agree with Meryl. This is going to be a huge improvement, especially when you see the existing conditions and the amount of hardscape. And I really do commend the effort of kind of tying together all these tree pits and creating a continuous planting bed that is going to provide greenery, minimize heat gain, handle stormwater, do a lot of the good things. But I do have a couple of questions as to what drove some of the decision making here. And I think this is an excellent drawing actually to use for that. My first question has to do with the geometries chosen and the cadence of sitting areas. You can tell how on the spaces to the left, sitting areas seem to be larger and more collected. They're almost, especially the second island, almost they're speaking to each other, but they're not quite. So I have questions about, what drove some of that decision making versus some of the other ones where the sitting areas are much smaller, but also less frequent. Thank you, Shiryoshi. And for example, we have areas like this where there's no sitting at all, right? So looking at here, we have a lot of sitting, a lot congregated, almost this moment where they're almost speaking to each other. I could see if they were to align a little bit more, it could create a more of a social condition where people are actually facing each other, versus areas that feel a little bit more solitary. So that's one of my questions. I would like you to speak a little bit more about the thought process behind that.
Sure.
The second one has to do with the market. Thank you for addressing our questions about who would be using the market here. Understood that there isn't a commitment yet. But I think my overall concern with this is that your plans only show 6 tents. So I would like to understand, based on the studies of adjacent markets that you've done, how big are they? Are 6 tents sufficient to create enough of a grouping that makes it marketable and attractive for groups? Because if not, that space could, you know, have the danger of actually feeling underutilized or even accommodating some illegal vending issues that happen in this area that we might not want, right? So second question. And then lastly, third question, given the amount of planting beds that we have here and the community's interest in pollinator gardens, I find it curious that you're actually designing plants that are very single species groupings, because those tend to, one, have a bit of a very uneven aesthetic throughout the year. You know, when the plants bloom, they look great all together, but then the ones around them are not in bloom. So it kind of looks very patchy. And two, you know, pollinator gardens really thrive by having a mix of species that are, there's always something in bloom and allows, you know, birds and bees to pause and move through, which when you have very collected species, there's less of that encouragement.
Sure.
So if you can speak to those
Okay,
questions, I
okay,
appreciate it. Thank
Let
you.
me do the second question first on the tents for this area. So we did study nearby markets, and we found that there are several that have just one tent. They range from 1 to 9, so we feel like 6 is a viable number. Also, I guess I can flip back to the slide. You know, what we've showed is just a recommendation for where the tents can go. We're not saying that they need to be anchored there and set there all the time. So they could, the layout could be reworked, but we do feel like 6 is kind of a happy medium for what is already successful in the area. Your first question on the,
Before we move off the tents, do you have another use, like, let's say, what will happen if no market decides that's a space they'd like to use?
yeah, so we talked about this at the community board meeting a lot, and people brought up, well, maybe this can be a space where we can have our own events here, and we can work with New York City Parks to secure permits for people to be able to use it for their own ideas. So that was another idea. A third that we've thought about is, you know, we're in Chinatown, and plaza dancing and things like that are very popular. So this could be a space where people from the community can use it for that. So our overall goal is to give them a flexible, comfortable space that people can use how they would like, and to not be too heavy-handed in the design where, we really design around something that's very specific, and then they decide, oh, that doesn't work, we want to use it a different way. So we're trying to make it flexible. But we did have a lot of conversations with the community board about that.
So the community did specifically request a flexible space. They didn't request other potential uses for this, like a dog run or playground or exercise equipment. Like this was their priority.
Their priority was flexible space. Yeah, nobody had asked for a playground or kind of built-in pieces like that.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want.
So let me go to the first question was about the seating nodes. So here's a good slide to talk about some of them. One is just the space that we have to work with and the existing trees. So we're trying to meander the path around here. You can kind of see it on this slide pretty clearly. So these black dots are all of the existing tree trunks, and we're trying to curve the path around those trunks. We worked with an arborist, and we've delineated root zones for the trees, and we're really trying to make sure that we're not going to kill any of the great trees that we have out there. So that was like number one for the path geometry. And then we used the path geometry to kind of set these opposite areas across from these curves for where we could fit in seating nodes. So it's a lot of it's driven by the existing trees and trying to stay away from the root zones. And then in the north section, again, we have lots of existing trees that we're trying to work around. And then we're also trying to transition back into up here. It's a more angled design. So we do these broad curves to try to make it relate. So if you're walking from the north section all the way down to South Street, it feels like a continuous experience and a continuous thought.
I mean, I think overall it reads very random. And when you flip through the slides and I look for your existing trees, I find areas that actually don't seem to have a lot of existing trees and could potentially allow for a more balanced layout of these benches. So I would just ask you to look at it a little bit more carefully, and maybe when you come back, do a plan that actually shows your tree protection zone against the bench nooks and against the pavements, so we can actually fully understand it. Because here you do have a lot, but on some of the previous slides, I don't see that many trees, and I would like to find opportunities to calibrate this a little bit more. It does not feel like there's a lot of again, calibration. And yes, we need to tie to the rest of the mall, but the rest of the mall was built, more than how many, like
More than 10 years.
more
yeah.
10 years ago. So in a way, with new materials, with new planting, with the site expansion, I just actually also don't see that there is that much need for a relationship, as opposed to making sure that this experience is great for the neighborhood, and understanding, Chinatown, a lot of people use the outdoors. What are we thinking happens in these sitting nooks, and how are we providing opportunities for different types of social moments?
To add to that, I guess I'm just to follow up on Isabel. I'm just, thank you for all the presentation. I'm concerned about the amount of seating. The number of seats for the density of the population, because it seems that people are, they're strolling down the middle, but a lot of people just go there to sit. I live in the neighborhood, and there's such a lack of open space that it's just so, desired. So I'm concerned about the numbers. How many seats do you have if I were to tally them up? Just wild guess.
Probably, at least 50. And we do have a mix of the 4-foot benches and
But the
also
50 means
cafe tables and
people in
chairs.
Seats, like a bench takes, or 50 benches, I guess is my question.
So you're wondering if we have enough benches, right? Because
Enough places for
yes,
people to
for people to
sit in
sit.
general.
Yeah.
And then also Isabel's comment about making real places where people talk to each other across and they gather, and is really,
So I think we get,
you don't.
yeah, no, we,
That's what it seems.
no, maybe we could work in some more social seating, but we give the objective of this was to put in the most seating we could, taking care of the trees, existing trees, but we'll take another look at that. But I think
That'd
that's,
be great.
we were pushing wherever we could, the path went where the tree roots aren't, and the seating went where the tree roots aren't. So the trees, protecting the existing trees was a big driver, but we'll take another.
But when the community, because you met with the community, I'm sure they, besides having flexible space, they must have said a place to
Yeah,
sit.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We know Sarah Roosevelt Park is nearby.
Mhm.
There's so many people out sitting in it. So we know that that's the big desire. You want to get out of your small apartment where you live with a bunch of people.
Or you're wherever you.
Yeah. So we'll take another
Great.
look at that.
Thank you.
I think I'll answer the third question because it really has to do with parks and parks maintenance. We are adding a massive amount of green space to parks. And if we do it like a pollinator garden, we can't maintain it. We've tried. So we'd have special pollinator gardens where we have a mix of plants in a one bed. But really what we found that we can maintain is to have beds that small, big sort of swaths of the same plant, because most of our the weeding and the maintenance we have are with transient people, with people who are at the Parks Department for a short time. They have no horticultural background. You say, can you remove everything out of this bed that doesn't look like this? That seems to be the technique. And so this project has a lot of variety, a lot of biodiversity, but it's just not as mixed as you would do if you had in your garden or in another place or in another world where we have incredible horticultural maintenance dollars. So this is the Parks Department way to get the diversity and to get the greening with what we have to manage.
With that in mind, Nancy, will you consider, I just got a little bit thrown off by the notion that the community wanted a pollinator garden and that there was also the idea that the community would help maintain it. So if that's not the case, or if that maybe only happens in some areas and not in others, I think that helps clarify.
Yeah.
But I still worry about having big swaths of, I mean, some of the plants here are very robust and they're gonna look good all year round. But for example, hellebores, you know, they bloom when nothing else is in bloom. And then they kind of, you know, lose a little bit their appearance, right? So when we have a big swath of just that, I worry that it's only going to be interesting through three weeks of the year. And then the rest is going to look perhaps a little bit unkept to the point that maybe encourages people to get into the planting beds and trample them because they don't quite see the robustness of the plant. So that's where I'm coming from, maybe thinking a little bit, if these big swaths and plants that the Parks Department is familiar with are what will be successful, how can they be arranged in a way that we just minimize those moments where there's no interest at all, or they just are either haven't bloomed or are died back. And as we see, encourage people to put their dogs on the planting bed or to step on the planting bed, which obviously we don't want to have.
Yeah, I think we can focus on, I know we focused a little bit about on the edges to where people do, where it's most vulnerable to dogs. So we can take another look at that. We're going to stay with these big swaths. That's what we can do. We've experimented a little with mixing two plants. We might have put hellebores with, what did we? Yeah. So maybe we'll do that in a couple places here. We have it around the Olmsted Center, but we have a garden there.
Yes.
So we have hellebores with something else.
And they look beautiful. We were there. When
Yeah.
They were all blooming and they were
Yeah.
amazing. But yeah, I'm just thinking more about, you know, what happens when a species is just not strong enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I want to say I really appreciate the greening of this particular project of this area. And but the thing I have most question about is where the bikes intersect with pedestrians, because obviously there's a big problem with the bigger vehicles hitting the littler vehicles. But I've had so many friends incapacitated by bicycles that, like, I'm really concerned about the areas where you have the crosswalks and where I think it's very effective. You have the jog just before sort of like the divot, so they have to slow down before they hit. And where it doesn't do that, I'm concerned that people will be hit by bikes, kids, and a lot, you know, people who just aren't really anticipating that they're going to be in traffic. And the bike traffic is serious traffic going 25 miles an hour. So, yeah.
DOT. We've been working with DOT and we will continue to do that. State of the art safety.
Yeah, and Commissioner, I really appreciate it. I think one of the things that we benefit from here is we do have 10 years worth of data of how this has performed so far in the previous phases, and it's proven very successful. We haven't had any accidents on the earlier phases of the mall. The one that did happen was actually in the street, and it was with a moped, not on the mall. So from a data perspective, I think we're excited about that. At the same time, DOT is still pushing on new standards for especially these kinds of spaces where bikes and peds are interacting at crosswalks. We'll be coming to, hopefully in the coming months, actually with some updated standards, especially also around delineation for those that have low vision or no vision. And so this is something that we're really keyed into, and we'll continue to work with the Parks Department on this project and a number of others that you'll be seeing. So. But I appreciate the concern for sure.
And Nick, since you're up there, I did want to ask, and was one of the questions that we asked earlier, if DOT is contemplating any raised crossings at any particular locations, especially like when we see here, like Division Street is such a short intersection. Has that been envisioned, and where are you with that?
Yeah, so we are trying to push that throughout the city as well, because it brings a lot of benefits. Unfortunately, we did take a look at Division Street. Actually, early in the project, we were hoping to close Division Street altogether and make it fully pedestrianized, but it is a truck route, and it actually, the volumes from a traffic study perspective show that in particular, the turns from Allen Street onto Division Street are quite heavy. And because it is a designated truck route, we don't do raised crosswalks there at the moment. So unfortunately, we can't do it at this particular intersection.
What others, are you exploring others or?
For this particular project, no, because all the other intersections are major intersections. It's East Broadway, Canal, like there's not really any other spots around this particular set of phase. But certainly in many of our other projects, it's something that we're taking a close look at.
Commissioners, any other comments or questions? Okay, so I will summarize before we have a vote. We would like the team to, when you come back, show the tree root zone. And we appreciate very much the efforts to work around that and to keep those beautiful trees healthy. To consider the placement and number of benches, and also to try to increase the opportunity for social interaction with those placements. And then looking at this question of diversifying the planting beds, maybe 2 kinds of plants. So with those 3 requests for your next presentation, I will now take a roll call vote on item number 29031, preliminary review of the reconstruction of the Allen Street and Pike Street malls and construction of a plaza at Pike Street in Manhattan. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote. Kenseth Armstead.
Approved.
Isabel Casilla.
Approved.
Lori Hawkinson.
Approved.
Bill Heinzen.
Approved.
Karen Keel.
Approved.
Perry Maloney.
Approved.
Manuel Miranda.
Approved.
Merrill Tisch.
Approved.
And I also approve and really appreciate the work in bringing this up to a great level for the community. Thank you very much. And you are unanimously accepted.
Thank you.
Okay. We're skipping. Okay. All right. So we'll now begin the committee meeting with the conceptual review of the installation of donor pavers at the Hip Hop Museum in Bronx Point, Bronx. We'll not hear public testimony or vote on this project today. Presenters, Gail, welcome, and please begin.
Good afternoon, commissioners and attendees. I'm Gail Rothstein from EDC. Thank you for all of the reviews and feedback for the donor paver program. Our first presenter is Rocky Bucano, who's the executive director of the museum, and Yadiel Rivera from Marvel Architects will do the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you, commissioners and attendees, for taking the time to hear our presentation today. My name is Rocky Buchanan. I'm the executive director of the Hip Hop Museum. This project is, as you probably already know, 14 years in the making. We're about 16 months away from opening. So this paver program is a way for us to engage the community and really accelerate our fundraising to support this project. We've retained the services of Marvel Architects to help with the landscaping of the project itself, but after we explored all the different alternatives of fundraising internally, externally, we thought that this was the most viable way for us to increase our fundraising capacity. So with that said, I'm going to pass the mic to Yadiel. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you for having us today. And I'm gonna run quickly through the presentation, but like Rocky said, the aim of this paver program is for the museum to do fundraising, but it also the location of it and where the placement and the selection of this as a paver program has a lot to do with how the museum wants to engage with the community and how the museum came about, right? And how hip hop came about, right, in the streets of the Bronx. So you've seen maybe in the past Bronx Point. So the project, the paver program and the museum is located at Bronx Point, which is at 149th Street and 145th Street Bridge along the Harlem River. The museum will be at the second level, the full second level of the building. This project is completed. Some of the images here are construction, but the project is actually finalized and everything is installed. The majority of the museum is on the second level with an entrance right there at the ground floor and a little bit of a presence there on the ground. And this second floor terrace exterior patio, it's open to the public, but it's for the museum to use. It has doors that the museum viewers and commerce can come out into that terrace, and you can see that here as well. So we're looking at two areas for this paver program. The first one is the terrace itself that I showed before. And the second one is these, what we're calling the apron. And this was part of the original design of the park and the placement of the building. The building sits in a park, and the geometry of the park and the esplanade is sort of this sort of curvilinear winding path that sort of opens up from water to the land. And the building has this sort of darker area of pavers at the base that kind of goes all the way around the building. And then the terrace is a second floor terrace. These are pedestal pavers. Let me just go back. These are the apron, which you see here, a little bit of it. And then here, these are 6 by 12 pavers. And the terrace pavers are 12 by 24 pavers on pedestal. So a little bit close up of the area. Terrace, second level, around 2,000 pavers available, but we're not using them. You're not using them all. And then the same with the apron area, which goes all the way around the building. And so this geometry that you see here exists already on site. And it's a darker paver mix. And we're planning on using that as the area where this paver program can go at the ground level. The inspiration for the design of the pavers or the program at the terrace is the idea of the boombox, which is an important symbol of hip hop culture. And we thought also lend itself for a very sort of graphic image or quality that actually represented the museum and the institution and what hip hop represents in the neighborhood. We explore, as you saw through multiple presentations, the two scales of a boombox. One was which was like creating a simplified graphic of a boombox on the paver itself, and the other one was to do a super graphic of a boombox on the terrace level. Based on your input, we have simplified the paver itself, and we're going for the super graphic on the terrace level. Without having the paver also have a boombox graphic. So the pavers at the top, which are 12 by 24, will be simple. So the two options, either the donor wants to just put their name, or the donor wants to put their name and a small sort of a message attached to it, which will be reviewed and vetted by the museum before accepting. So that's what we had before. This is what we have now. And then 2 tones of pavers to actually create the super graphic. We were using 3 before. We think we can achieve it with 2. So the lighter paver is the paver that's already installed. at the terrace. So that's the color as it exists. And then we're introducing this medium gray tone to actually create the graphic of the contrast between the two pavers, create the graphic of this boombox. So again, boombox, this is the storefront of the museum. So museum goers will be here in the interior of the space, and they will be looking out, and they will be able to see the terrace and see the graphic from some of the exhibition spaces and some of these areas inside. So we're facing the boombox towards the museum. And we took a pass at simplifying some of the graphic design of the boombox itself internally. And the other ones are some sort of musical notes that go with it. The total of it is 956 pavers total, and it's just 2 tones of gray, but which in this legend we're showing 3 tones, just so that you know which ones are the ones that we are intending to use for the paver program. So these guys will be the same color as that, but are part of the program. These are not part of the program, right? So only the darker pavers and the interior light pavers here will be part of the program. The paver program.
How does someone become part of the paver program?
Right, so someone become a part of the paver program by actually accessing the museum website. They will have it set up so that you can buy a paver and write your name and your message through sponsorship, yeah.
Did we, a couple of months ago, the issue around pavers where, by the way, I'm in a lot of fundraising for cultural institutions. I'm with you, buddy. I think it's the greatest thing. I think it's the way to excite people about participating. However, I do remember there was an issue at this table about pavers. Did we ever institutionalize a policy about it?
So we shared the guidelines and where we landed after our second conversation with Gail, our liaison, and relayed the feedback for this particular project to the team. So it is on a case-by-case basis.
I just want to know which groups are allowed to have pavers, why we said no to some. I'm going to fight for your pavers.
That's what we're happy about.
But I just want to make sure that there is a consistency at the table.
Yeah, yeah, it was.
You want me to withdraw the question?
No, no,
Is it
no.
supposed to be paper? Because I could do that.
No, so what we landed on was a proposal to not be adding to visual clutter, to be simple in a way that is adding a benefit to the area it's in, so increasing it in value aesthetically versus detracting from it by being too visually cluttered. Those two were the main things, but we also had a series of other things, and I can pull this up, but like to me, the biggest things we shared was about reducing visual clutter and making sure that it is benefiting the surrounding neighborhood.
As part of public service.
Yeah.
I just want to say the most important thing is consistency.
Right.
So if you are telling me that we are consistent here, I'm very happy. I'll buy 10.
And the fact that this was the Hip Hop Museum and it's a nonprofit entity.
There's
but-
nothing that's out.
No, no.
Meryl, just to reiterate, nothing here in that Rocky and Yadiel are sharing with us is inconsistent with the guidelines that we discussed before.
Yeah.
Totally consistent.
Great.
Okay. Yeah.
Perfect. It's great to hear. All right, so. Done. Let's just go. Yes, definitely. Yes. If you want me to continue, I continue. If we're good, we're good. All right, so, simplified version of the design, following the guidelines, which, we appreciated. And we appreciated the last round of comments too. We think like simplification ends up being better and easier to handle, control, and for the better of the project. Ground level, just quickly, there's still 3 tones of pavers, but these 3 tones of pavers already exist in the design. So when you look at it here, you have, slightly 3 variations of that tone that are part of that field of pavers. So we are trying to use exactly the same, well, we're going to use exactly the same pavers that we installed already, right? So there will be new ones that we'll buy and we'll engrave and we'll take one out and replace. And when we take that first batch of pavers out, we will store them and reuse them for the second batch of installation. So we'll take those to engrave and reinstall, right? So we're gonna be mindful also as well about the reuse of the pavers, right? And we are planning on starting, closer to the entrance from this point out, so towards the east, which is exterior street out here. So it will come this way first, and then, in that later phase, if they sell enough pavers, it will come this way around. And it will be installed in a little bit more a randomized area. We are not planning or expecting that we'll sell 100% of these pavers, right? So in the same way that this field of pavers is sort of installed in a kind of like random pixelated way, we expect to install also the pavers from here to there. And let's say 50% of the pavers are sold in the first batch. So you'll see 50% of the pavers engraved there and the other 50 not, right? So again, this is exactly what is there, except that you have the engraved. And this example, we maximize. We show everything engraved, but expect some of these not to be engraved. There's some limitations to fonts. Is that time? To fonts that we can use so that actually the engraving process works. So this is a font that the engravers, which is done through sandblasting, recommend to use. So that's what we're using. So very simple. We're gonna control the spacing and the placement of the text, but simple. And the last thing I want to mention is that we are aiming to so we're doing the engraving through sandblasting, and there is a paint that goes into the engraving. This paint is called lithochrome, and it is there's a monument line of that paint that is used widely for painting engravings on monuments, like in cemeteries and paver programs like this one and whatnot, right? So it's a paint that's proven to last in open space situations like this one. We want to use a darker gray paint instead of a black, so that we kind of control a little bit the contrast. So as you're walking down, I think it's better if it's a dark gray instead of just a pure black paint that we use. And I have to say, we're still going back and forth with the fabricator or the sample manufacturer to actually get us the right color of paint, but we know it exists. It's a standard color that they use. And if we don't do engraving, if we don't do painting, it kind of gets lost, and it just gets lost more with time as the dust settles, So we think that the paint is important, and it protects the paper as well. And I think that's the end.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Commissioners, any comments or questions? Manuel, I'm looking at you.
Well, I think the simplification is really successful, and not including the illustration on the brick, and having it doubled in the kind of like the pixelated image. So I think that's great. And I just had a few nitpicky comments, which I think you can take or leave. But when you have the text added, I would do some samples just to see what that looks like with real text, because the text is center aligned. So the kind of rag, the parts of the word sticking out, you kind of want to watch how that looks. And then depending on the length of those messages, the larger headline of the name will appear in different places. So that could have a nice pattern effect, randomized effect, or it could look inconsistent. So I think that's something to think about too. Yeah. But I think it'll be cool. And I guess this is also more subjective, but in the illustration with the boombox, are musical notes the right notation? Because I think I guess I think of hip hop, I think more of like percussion or rhythmic, notation rather than like notes notation,
We-
but that's also subjective. too,
Yeah.
So,
There could be a playable note with the pattern of the of the musical notes, like we're thinking, maybe it's a sound that, yeah.
So you'd be able to play it.
I think that will be fun. Yes, ideally that will be fun.
Right, right.
Ideally, that is, I mean, one of the things, we would love some feedback because programmatically, as we take the orders, if there's a way to constrain what the names are relative to what the comment is, because that visual component you're talking about is important. And we want to make sure it looks really nice. And so people are going, ooh, love this. So anyway, any input is welcome.
well, I think you could do a template of like, here's name only, name in one line, name in two lines, name in three lines, and then you could
Correct.
lay that ahead of
Yes,
time
yes,
to see how it looks. So do you put the one-liners in specific places or?
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, because unavoidably, like what you say, maybe there's a potential that there's a name that's a little longer. That, let's say like we allow this to go like to that 1 inch mark. But the name continues on a second line. And that could happen here as well, but this will have to shift up a little bit and then, yeah. Yeah, I think we have an imaginary line here of like a border that we don't want any of the text to go beyond, but it's not going to be edged into it.
There's a finite number of templates.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Thank you.
I have one comment, which is just purely aesthetic. And I think the boombox as a central image really works. But I think the notes, not for content or conceptual, but it visually does not work. And so it just looks choppy. I'm not sure I'm not sure what the other graphical thing should be, but I think you should play with it.
Yeah, sorry.
And
So bad.
quite frankly, to the degree that hip hop artists spend time working on their bars and try 100 words until they get the right one. It could be language, which would be great. Like you have that one quote,
Yeah.
you have the one quote, but it could be language. So that's one option. But it also could be sound waves. It could be a number of things, like you said, on the low register. So there are a number of different ways to get to something that will give you even more space to market, which obviously hip hop is marketing with beats, and the aesthetics you want. But you've got to play a bit more. And then I think from the play that like this feels like the second idea that came up, the musical notes, but not the best idea that came up. But I don't know what that thing is, and I wish I had some suggestions, except that I have to say if I feel like it's, and especially since the boombox cuts into where the music is, and you just had those that it just this is not. But I think that there is a solution here that's gonna sing, and then you'll get what you want. And the other thing is that for a lot of people, they will see this thing from above like this.
Correct.
So it's not random that you're doing this. It will be seen. It will be registered in this way. So public art is 360 degrees this way and this way.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to think in that way and get somebody, if what you want to do is commission someone to just, get a graphic designer, commission them just to play with giving you options to do this.
The notation.
And find an artist who works with hip hop artists on stuff, on their album covers. Find someone who is already in the diaspora, so they're not trying to backwards in, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought the other representation of the boombox was better.
Yeah.
Or to me, what? It's kind of closer, but I guess I'm missing the cassette.
We could, yeah,
Yeah, the cassette.
this has like, we could, yeah.
It's the horizontal bars, like, to me, boombox more.
Than this one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And are you working?
I mean, they're working with the graphic designers internal to Marvel, but so it's, yeah. How hip, yeah.
Yeah. Did all the albums. Right. Say Adams, who did all the album covers or whatever.
Making his own album covers, he just playing around.
Right.
Because it's his music and anybody else can do it.
Right. Right.
But it made sense, and when you see George Clinton's. But I'm saying, when you see George Clinton's albums and you see the craziness of the music, you see the craziness of the art, it all makes sense together.
Comes together, right?
And that's not happening here. The boombox is a great central icon, and I'm glad that you guys settled on that, but also play with it because you already have two different opinions about whether or not. But to me, what matters most is that you got to get as many names in there as you can, and
Yeah.
as beautiful a boombox as you can.
Right.
But then the other iconic thing that goes around it doesn't have to be. It doesn't even have to be recognizable, but it does have to flow.
Yes.
And flow is key. I mean, we all know flow. Yeah.
Maybe one thing to keep in mind that we've considered is to simplify and get away from the notes, to actually use those dedicated gray pavers outside of the boombox itself as sort of a hall of fame for artists that the museum would actually dedicate. So would be fairly fixed spaces that we could use around there, not use the note concept, but use the rectangles as kind of a walk of fame. If you just look right outside the museum along the path, it's almost like a walking path,
Yeah.
right? So each of those pavers could be earmarked to an artist that the museum identifies over time. And that's not people purchasing it. We could have it purchased on behalf of the artist on their fan base, or we can just let the museum use this over time to dedicate or earmark it to icons in the industry or folks who've contributed to the community and so on.
I think the main thing is that we have to see it. I can't see it now. I went to art school and I'm not great at talking about things, but when I see it, I know it.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And just to clarify, I mean, of course, this is donor paving and how we're looking at it, not as public art or a walk of fame, but totally think this conversation is really valid.
Can you clarify how the funds that are raised are being used? I know there was an answer provided, but I couldn't. I wasn't sure if this is, are you funding museum operations through the sale of pavers? Are you creating like a acquisition, an endowment or a maintenance fund for the pavers, like a separate maintenance fund and also maybe, or a fund for acquisition? I don't know what you think the yield of this is going to be, but.
Yeah, so I think what we're planning on doing right now is, first of all, from a cost perspective, the paver program is almost self-funded, right? Because we have a marketing cost that we have to endure, but then we're generating revenue and using that revenue to sort of drive the program. With respect to how, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean. When you say marketing costs, you mean the cost of fundraising? Or?
Right, so the marketing cost of fundraising to get the site up, to do the marketing to our prospect. We have a captive audience of folks who are already interested, who are members, who've been following the museum for the last 10 years. And so we've got that. So I think that's first and foremost. Is your question sort of on the revenue side, once we've gotten it, how we use the
What's
funds
the
after?
money be? I mean, I just worry, like.
Yeah, it's definitely.
You shouldn't be I mean.
Go ahead.
If you're counting on pavers to fund museum operations, I think we have a problem.
Right. So that's not right. So this
Okay,
is going to
I
be right,
misunderstood
more
that.
towards the endowment, maintaining the program that we've got here, right? Because these pavers have to be maintained over time, right? So it's really about making sure that this is set aside. It's what we would call restricted funds in our space, right? Funds raised. They actually were testing the market still, but we've got them as low as $500. So yeah, so 500 to 2,500. And in the case of the upper paver area here, we've got companies that are willing to spend 20 to 25,000 to pay, to buy a paver for, no logos on the companies.
Just corporate camp.
So the higher value pavers are the 12 by 24 on this terrace level. And then the apron is more affordable, coming in at the 500 to 2,500 mark, depending on placement. Right? But we think the market will drive that pricing, obviously, so we're not being restrictive.
Sorry, I missed something. Are the notes, are those also donor pavers or is it
Yeah.
just the boom box? Okay.
Yes, it was two things. We're trying to sort of create a rhythm with, I think your comments on that part, I think, we've been going back and forth with that. But it's also a way of extending the paver program, right? Like to make more surface for them to be available. Yeah. Not necessarily.
Could be any color, right?
Correct.
That's what you said. on the
Correct.
other
Correct.
slides.
Yeah.
And I know you were, as I was understanding it, you were trying to restrict the donor pavers to the drawn element,
Mhm.
but I don't understand why. Yeah, why? The other ones are also for sale. And I mean, once you get up, like, especially once you get up onto this terrace area, and if you're opening it up to corporate institutions and others, I don't see why you would limit yourself to, I don't understand why you would limit.
No, it wouldn't be restricted beyond having an endowment, right? I think the idea with the revenue from the pavers program is really to support, not just the endowment, but particular programs as well, but not operations in itself.
No, I'm not talking about that at all. I'm just saying that you're drawing with these pavers.
Yes.
And I wouldn't say that you should restrict the right. Yes. I think that would be most efficacious, but also I just don't see like the drawn space, the non-drawn space, it should all be
Cohesive.
yeah.
Right. So I was
And
gonna,
gotta play more to make it more fun because hip hop is fun.
right.
And that's my main point.
Yeah.
That like the tone of it has to be audacious like hip hop. And you have to, I mean, you're talking about the kings of rock and people who branded
Right,
themselves
right.
world beaters. And then
So-
you're gonna be like, but we can only paint here. It doesn't make sense.
So to answer your point, I
Yeah.
agree with you 100%. And the musical notes aside, if we were to replace that, hip hop is a culture that represents 5 different elements, as you already know. So you have your writers, you have your dancers, your DJs. Perhaps the way to do that is to do an artful representation of the people who are in the culture. So there's dancing, there's other things that you can see there around the boombox.
Mm.
And then it pays true tribute to how the culture was created in the area that it was born from. And it's
Think-
not just a representation of sound or,
Cool
something like
DJ
that.
Herc would be very pleased to hear you say that. But I don't know what you're talking about until I see it.
Right,
And then you have to do that. And you can't get that from an architect.
right.
Can I share an idea? It's more like art crit, but the 4 pillars, MC, DJ, BB, and then the writer, I don't know what you put for writer, but yeah. But for like letters, like that are pixelated to
Yeah.
represent them could be DJ,
Yeah.
MC, BB,
Yeah.
and then one more for writer, graffiti,
Yeah.
GF maybe, or, yeah, just an idea, but,
Yeah.
And that's a great idea, but if it doesn't work visually, dump it. I'm just saying, that's really what it comes down to. You gotta see it in the same way you gotta hear it. A hip hop song is not just, yeah. Right.
Just real quick, real short, because I'm also an architect.
No, and architects are great.
But I think it would be great. We always think we can do graphic design. And in my humble opinion, I think might be great to get a graphic designer here because they think of things we don't think about because that's all they think about. So I would just, if there's any way we could. I know, I'm just like, how are we going to pay for it? But maybe we all give a paver or something. I don't know. I feel like it's important. Yeah.
and just one last thought too is, if it is all pavers, I feel like if it's just the boombox, that's really powerful. And then maybe these letters too could be a side thing. But then again, I think like the boombox should be really iconic, like have knobs and,
you know, like the cover of Radio by L Cool J, you know, it's like, I feel like that's a really iconic, you know, album cover that this could relate to in some way.
I would agree with that. I think because of the scale of it, the boombox itself can afford to be a little bit more detailed, which also when you're standing on top of it, you know, it might give you a very different perspective than when you're looking at it from above. And that may be a fun thing for the museum. And then maybe the rest can just be subdued, or maybe you recognize things in a different way. Because in a way, it's almost trying to create a carpet, but you kind of don't need it. I think the boombox is strong enough. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Where you can see on the left.
Yeah.
The left has a lot more detail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm giving you a lot of ideas. I think we should follow.
So I'm going to summarize before we close. One thing is in our guidelines that Meryl brought up earlier, the main thing is that public spaces should, even if they have this kind of donor paver, really be recognizable and usable as publicly owned public spaces. So that's just a thought. We know corporations can buy, and we're, you know, hope to sell to tons of corporations. But this is such a, like, it's in the right place at the right time. This could be nowhere else in the world, no other time. So we just want to make sure that it remains feeling like it belongs to the people of the Bronx. So that's one thing. And then the other things really have to do with this kind of recommendation of just thinking about bringing a graphic designer on. And there are tons of graphic designers who would be happy to do this, like, as a gift, you know. But the things to look at are studying the text and maybe coming up with some templates for individual pavers, which will make your life easier too. And then looking at the notes, we talked a lot about that, and considering whether you need them at all, whether they could be some kind of text, as Ken Seth was saying, or even maybe a game that kids play on the ground or whatever. There's lots of things you can look at, or just dropping them out entirely. So with that, anything else? With that, I want to say we are so proud of this. I'm excited, really excited to come when you open. And congratulate you on getting to this point, because we know it wasn't easy. And of course, and so with that, this concludes our meeting, and the public meeting is now adjourned.